Hi, this is Mr. Grove, and this is part 2 on our unit on the special senses. Part 2 looks at hearing. To start our unit on hearing, let's take a look at the anatomy of the ear. And when I say anatomy of the ear, I mean the whole system that allows us to hear. And this is divided into 3 major parts. The part 1 is the outer ear, and that's the part everybody thinks about when they think of hearing because it's so visible. Part 2 is the middle ear, and part 3, deep inside your head, is the inner ear. So let's take a few moments and look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. The external ear is called the auricle, or it's also called the pinna. And pinna tends to be used a lot more when we're talking about other animals besides humans, but it is used with humans as well. The pinna or auricle gathers sound waves. So sound waves that are moving through this room, you can all hear my voice right now, are being collected by your auricle or pinna and being directed into that hole in your head. And that hole in your head is called an external acoustic meatus. It's about an inch long, and it ends at a membrane called the eardrum or tympanic membrane. And what you'll find lining this meatus are ceruminous glands. And ceruminous glands are modified sweat glands that produce earwax. And earwax is useful in keeping critters out of your ear. They don't like it, and so they tend to back out, or the earwax pushes them out. So it's a protective device, but it can be a nuisance too for those of you that produce a lot more earwax than normal. The middle ear is a small air-filled chamber, and it's really cool because this is where you find the smallest bones in the body. So here they are. They're called the auditory ossicles, and there's 3 of them, and we're going to look at them in the next slide. So this middle ear is bordered by your eardrum on one side and what's called your oval window. What a bunch of neat terms, huh? Oval window on the other side. So we'll take a little closer look here. What you see, what I really want to look at is I want to look at your ossicles right here. So here they are. Excuse me. So you've got the tympanic membrane, so sound waves come in. They've been collected by your auricle, been directed down your meatus, and they cause your eardrum to begin to vibrate, and that vibrates the very first ossicle called the hammer. And that hammer beats on the anvil. The anvil, in turn, vibrates the stapes, which does look like a horse stapes. And so what these 3 bones do is they amplify these sound vibrations. And so it acts as an amplifier, and that presses on what's called the oval window, which, as we're going to find out, makes some fluid move around, which is going to go in here, inside the inner ear. So what we've got are the hammer, the anvil, or the stirrup, or the scientific terms are the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And you need to know those, and you need to know them in the proper order. Also, there's what's called the auditory tube. This auditory tube is a tube that runs from your middle ear all the way down to your throat. And it's useful for keeping to balancing out the air pressure. So as you drive over the mountains and the pressure drops, you tend to yawn, and when you yawn, that opens up this tube quite a bit and balances out the air pressure. Because if the air pressure goes up or down, in relation to outside your eardrum, the eardrum will either press outward or press inward, and that impedes this vibration process. So you tend to yawn to balance that out. You probably also know that when you go underwater in a swimming pool, you can feel the pain as that pressure pushes in on your eardrum. So what you tend to do is you hold your nose and you force air up that auditory tube to balance out that pressure in your middle ear. The inner ear is kind of where it's at. And I say kind of where it's at because you're going to see that hearing is a really complex process that involves so many things. But that's where we have the neurons that are actually going to do the hearing itself. And they're found in what's called the cochlea, or snail. And it looks like a snail. And there's a vestibule that kind of connects things until we get into the semicircular canals. And you'll remember the semicircular canals are the organs of equilibrium or dynamic equilibrium. But this little computer graphic shows the eardrum where sound hits it. There's your three ossicles right there. And they're going to vibrate the oval window, which is going to move some fluid, which is going to come down into here. So we'll talk about that, the actual mechanics. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about kids that have ear infections. Prior to 5 years of age, most kids get quite a few ear infections. And what happens is fluid actually builds up behind the eardrum. And you can see this. Doctors, that's why they look in your ear. They can see bubbles behind that eardrum. And there shouldn't be any bubbles because it's an air-filled chamber. So what they do is this pressure builds up behind that eardrum, and it hurts because it pushes your eardrum out, and you got to get rid of that fluid. So these tubes are inserted, and the fluid can leak out. And those tubes will fall out on their own. If they don't, then the doctor does have to pull them out. But most of the time they do fall out on their own. Now, the mechanics of hearing is really complicated. And this is just a nutshell here. Your outer ear collects the sound, your tympanic membrane vibrates to that sound, and your three ossicles vibrate the oval window. The oval window gets the fluid moving. The fluid moves even another membrane in the snail, and that membrane moves hair cells, which create the action potential due to our potassium, sodium dance that we've talked about when we looked at the nervous system. And then the brain actually hears it as it gets sent to it on a nerve. The steps in just a little bit more detail. I've got it down to 8 steps here. Step 1, sound waves enter the auditory meatus. 2, the eardrum vibrates. 3, your ossicles amplify the vibrations. That stapes then hits the oval window, takes these vibrations, and causes fluid to vibrate in the cochlea. And it's here where we have the organs of Corte. And I should have probably changed the color on this, underline it. So you want to go ahead and underline that. The organs of Corte are the actual neurons or receptor cells, the hair cells that move and from the vibrations and create the action potential. So the action potential, which of course is sent through this nerve. And you'll recognize that nerve when we learn the 12 cranial nerves. That impulse is set to the auditory cortex of the brain, of the cerebrum, and you hear sound. And the round window, which is located below the oval window, actually dissipates vibrations that maybe are too great and could actually damage this whole system. Here's an electron microscope showing you the hairs inside what's called the organ of Corte, right here. And these hair cells are embedded in a membrane. And so you got to really be careful when you're listening to earbuds or going to a concert and deciding to stand right in front of a giant speaker, because once these hair cells get torn out of their membrane, they cannot be fixed. They can't be put back, and that will definitely cause deafness. So you really want to be careful. And we lose these hair cells anyway because the world's a noisy place. So you definitely can't hear as good as you did just 5 years ago. And every year, you're going to lose a few more and a few more. Well, that could lead to deafness. And deafness is any kind of degree of hearing loss. And there's 2 types. There's conductive or conduction deafness and sensorineural deafness. In conduction deafness, you'll remember that conduction means you're in contact. Well, anything that interferes with the vibrations of sound, that means from your eardrum through your 3 bones right to the oval window. If anything stops those things from vibrating, and that can even include earwax. As you look at this cool picture, this is looking inside somebody's ear, and this is a plug of ear wax, and that earwax is pushing on right there, pushing on the tympanic membrane, and so you don't hear quite as well. And I'm one of those people that has a lot of earwax, so periodically I have to flush my ears, because you never want to stick a Q-tip. You don't want to stick anything in your ears. In fact, the saying is the only thing you put in your ear is your elbow. So think about the wisdom of that statement. In the other form of deafness, you're actually losing those receptor cells. They're getting torn out, and that's definitely going to be permanent. A hearing aid will often help you hear. It doesn't usually help here. You'd have to look at what's called a cochlear implant to do anything with the neural forms of deafness. Okay, that's it for lesson 2. Lesson 3 on vision will be coming up next. So this is Mr. Grove signing off for now.